unions, but also for loan funds, and have done it long enough so that I've seen the changes over the years with the fund, which have mostly been improvements. But, okay, next slide. So I don't know if you can see that.
Yes, that's
the
screen.
And it's in here for two reasons. One is that at some point in the application process, you will feel like this, okay? And the second is just kind of this Occupy moment that a version of this painting just sold for $120 million for this one painting. And Brian was showing you how much money they have to give out this year, about $125 million for all the CDFIs in the whole country compared to this painting. Just let that sink in. Okay. So I have fewer tips because of the time. I think, and remember the title of this is How to Write a Competitive CDFI Application. It doesn't say successful, because there are a lot of things that can enter into success, even including who your member of Congress is, and what state you're in, and what part of the country, and lots of different things. But I think to be competitive, you have to start with being a competitive CDFI. You have to start with doing a good job. And I say this as somebody who gets a certain percentage of my income from writing CDFI applications. You can write an incredibly beautiful application, but if you're not doing the work, you're not going to get the money. So deployment is really important. It's the Community Development Financial Institution Fund. They are about financing. They want you to get the money out the door onto the street to the people and businesses that need it. So lending your money out, not having it sitting around. Leverage, using community partnerships, using other sources of funding so that the CDFI fund can say, we're investing $1 here and it's leveraging X amount of dollars from other funding sources. They're using our money very efficiently. Management and strategic planning, having strong management, you can show that they know what they're doing, you have a plan, the money that you're asking for from the CDFI fund fits into that plan, and you have defined outcomes that you're looking for. And financial soundness. Nobody gets money by saying, if you don't give us this money, we're going to go out of business next year. Right? That is not a winning strategy. You want to say, we have been able to do this much with the money we have, and if we get this extra money, boy, we can do so much more. This would be a really good investment. So that's number one. Number two, write for your audience. And this is, there's this old quote, if I had more time, I would have written less. Allow yourself enough time so that you can pare it down, really be concise, explain your terminology. We get so used to using jargons and acronyms and abbreviations, and the people who are reading are not necessarily going to know what those mean. So you have to spell it out. Don't assume, I know the fund tries to do this, but they don't always have readers who understand your type of CDFI. So make sure you're explaining it clearly. It's really good to recruit somebody who really doesn't know about your field as a proofreader. Significant others, depending on the quality of your relationship, can be good for this. You know, if you can get somebody who really likes you to sit down and read it and say, this makes no sense at all. But
Can I just make a quick point? So we actually do have reviewers, and they're experts in community development from all across the country. And so if any of you don't apply in a particular funding round, we'd be interested in having you be a reviewer if you'd like to see how the process works. So some groups can do that every other year. We'd love to have you as a reviewer. The second point I'd like to make just real quickly is that we do have experts for each type of industry, and we make sure we have enough credit union experts, banking, venture capital, and loan fund experts, both in affordable housing and small business. The thing that they might not know, though, is your local target market and your local area. So they understand your institution type, and we make sure we match them to those teams, but they might not necessarily know the challenges in your community because they might be from California or Seattle or wherever. So that's really the critical thing, is don't assume they know how distressed your market is.
Right. So if you say the average cost of housing in your area is $125,000, and somebody from California is reading this, they're just going to laugh. You know, but $125,000 might be a stretch for people in your community. So you have to explain it. Okay.
Quick question.
Sure.
When you were just mentioning, Brian, about being a reviewer.
Yeah.
One, how do you go about doing that? Is that contacting you? And
yeah, if you contact any one of us, we actually do a public announcement for solicitation of reviewers. At the beginning of, before we start reviewing them, after the applications are due. And so as long as you're not, if you don't work for an applicant yourself, you could be a consultant that has helped on other applications, which you then have to recuse yourself from. But if you work for a CDFI that applied, then you're automatically ineligible. Sometimes there's a case where if you work for a CDFI that applied for FA, you could still perhaps be a TA reviewer or vice versa.
But it's in that particular round.
But in that particular round and program. And then so some groups do every other year. So the grant writer from their organization might be a reviewer 1 year. Then you can kind of see how things work and how we score, and then apply the next year.
And then my other question is your compensation tied to that?
So it's really kind of a labor of love, I would say. So it's really people who are dedicated to the field of community development. It's competitive, so we do want community development experts, but we want to make sure we have enough from all the different institution types as well. Their compensation is about $250 to $300 per review, and each reviewer reviews between 10 to 12 assignments. They spend about 4 to 6 hours.
Time frame.
So it's a labor of love.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so most of these we can skip over, but the guidance, there is a document that comes out. There's the Federal Register, the NOFA, but then there is a document called the Guide to the Program, and that's where it gives you the tips and the subpoints, and that's what you really need to go through to make sure that you're answering all the questions.
Where's that guide found? On the internet?
It's found on their website.
And it's called
and
Guidance?
through grants.gov.
Okay.
Yeah.
What's it called?
Brian, the guidance, it's called
So we have, it's the 2012 funding application guidance. And so it's the same guidance for the FA and TA application. Okay. That's one document. And then there's a separate document for NACA or Native American awardees, and that's a totally separate document, slightly different.
And it gives examples. It's very, very useful.
Is this something new, or has it been around?
No, it's been around for
Okay.
a few years.
But it's also available on, it's also available through both grants.gov or through we post it on our website as well. Sorry, Dee.
One person has to be responsible for the final product, and that has to be a person who has the authority to get other people to produce. So when that person says to the finance office, I need these projections by such and such a date, the finance office needs to know that they need to get them done by that date. That one person assures the consistency. Again, as Brian said, things have to match. The narrative has to match the charts. You need a lot of time. What time, speaking of time,
It's 1 o'clock now. What time does it go to?
Oh, okay, 15 minutes. So we'll have time for questions.
Lunch starts at 1:30.
Yeah.
So we could
Yeah.
hang on, people are.
Last year, okay, Brian, this is where I'm going to raise some of the issues about last year's application. And Brian said they have improved, so I want to get his answers.
They said that 5 years ago, too.
I know, they say that every year. And some things have. Last year they switched to a PDF format instead of a Word document and Excel charts. And there were some problems with that. One of the problems was that they, from our perspective, from the CDFI perspective, didn't consult with CDFIs enough before making the changes. One of the curveballs that they threw at us was a new form of economic distress criteria. And the economic distress criteria seem to have a way of changing every year. This year we actually got 2 changes, one thanks to Congress. So last year, the economic distress criteria changed to census tracts, whereas previously it had been counties. Now, if I went up to you and said, where are you lending? You could tell me what county or city you're lending in. You could tell me what zip code you're lending in. I don't know if any of you could tell me what census tracts you're lending in. Okay? So that was a problem. What's happening this year?
That was actually in response to the huge amount of complaints we got that the county level was not accurate enough, because CDFI serves specific neighborhoods, which is at the census tract level. And so at a county level, it just didn't capture some of the most distressed counties in the country. So that's why we went from that. It was also a way to, for some of the groups who didn't have as much qualitative market studies and research reports unique to them, a way for us to quantitatively score groups and the market needs in their area, and kind of make it a black or white, more transparent kind of way to score market needs. And so that's why we went in that direction.
Okay, so do we know what's going to happen this year?
So we're still exploring what we're going to do for 13 in terms of distress points. So we haven't come to a conclusion yet on that. So we're still working on it. I think in terms of, I wouldn't see it jumping back to at the county level, because there's such a backlash to doing it at a county level. Yeah. That if anything, if it stays the same, it'll either stay the same or be removed. And if it stays the same, it would be at the census tract level.
Okay. And what happened was that you actually could get points, additional points in the scoring based on your measure of economic distress. So there's a strategy issue about that I'll get back to in a few minutes. There are also text limits. Each section of the PDF you would cut and paste into the section, and each section had a character limit, which is an improvement over page limits, where you might use a different font and it came through differently in terms of pages. But especially for larger organizations, if you're a loan fund that's doing just business loans or just housing loans, it's easier to fit in to the text limit. More complex organizations have trouble fitting in. So,
could you just ask him to turn it off?
I'm sorry?
Could you ask him to not run it?
What's that?
Ask him not to run the machine right now.
Sounds like a business.
So we don't know about the changes anticipated for this year, but a good guide is to look at last year's application is still up on the CDFI website. Look at the application, look at the guidance. It'll help you do the work before their announcement comes out. Next slide. So before you begin, you want to have a big picture plan. You don't, I have written applications for organizations that cannot tell me until the day the application is due how they want to use the money. And I will never work for those organizations again because life is too short. But you should know what your plan is. How does this CDFI application fit into your plan? How will you use the money? And specifically, to do more. They're not giving you money to do the same thing you've already been doing. You want to do more, you want to do it better, you want to do it in a different place or use a different market. And you want to have buy-in. You don't want to promise something that you can't deliver. You need to really have your organization at all the important levels buy into what you're proposing to do. As I said, you have appoint person who has authority to get it done, and decide on who's going to actually write the application. Have any of you used consultants to write the application? Okay. One thing that it's really important to know is to recruit early, because there are not enough consultants to go around.
Good consultants.
Yeah, good consultants. Thank you. And don't expect that if you hire a consultant, you're not going to do work.
There you go.
You still have to do a tremendous amount of work in the organization. So, and people have to be ready to do what the consultant says they need to do, get things in on time, all of that stuff. Go on. This is, again, this will be on the coalition website, so you don't have to write down all of these things, but just examples of what's in the guide. It gives the scoring by section, or at least it has in past years. It provides tips. So it will say, in this section, be sure to address this, this, and this. Be sure to address it. And this is from last year's page 41 that I just happened to notice, was a good example of them telling you how to answer this question in a way that will give you the point. So the guidance has that throughout. Things to think about. What is the impact that your activities are going to have? Brian talked about how competitive the application is. They want their money to do something. They want to be able to go back to Congress and say, we gave out this money and it had this impact in these communities. So think about what your market needs, how you will track the impact, how you will report back to them on what you've done. I think right now it's still important to talk about the impact of the recession that we haven't come out of. How do you reach your target market? And especially, how do you reach the hard-to-reach people? We often tend to talk about word of mouth, right? Our borrowers are our best publicity. Well, hard-to-reach people are not going to get reached by word of mouth. How do you reach the people who aren't tied into those networks? What do you do? And who are your community partners? Again, the question of leverage. How do you use other organizations to increase the impact of what you're doing? Again, the question of leverage. What would you do if you don't get a grant? This is one of the questions they ask. And it's something that you really have to think about. Curl up and die is not an option. But, you know, will you be able to do it if you don't get this grant? Are there other funding sources you can look at? Can you go on a longer time frame? Demonstrating your ability to meet your goals. Don't promise what you can't deliver. What's your experience administering other grants? And meeting your business plan targets. They want to know that you have the capacity to do what you say you're going to do. What are your advantages? Why should they give you the money as opposed to all these other applicants? What are the things that you do best? What differentiates you from other CDFIs? You want to have something in there that makes you stand out from the other applicants, that makes them notice you and say, yeah, this is a good bet, this is a good place to put our money. At the same time, being honest about what your weaknesses are, what needs to be improved, and how are you going to address that. Part of strong management is realizing what areas need to be improved and developing a plan to do that. Okay. Community needs. You know your community better than anybody else, and as Brian said, certainly better than the readers usually do. And And one of the great things, there's another slide about this, is that there is now so much data available on the internet to indicate what's going on in your communities, to demonstrate the need. Focus your application on a few specific needs rather than we're going to address everything in this community. So here are a few sources of useful data. The census has an incredible amount of data, updated for 2010. BankOn is a new one, which has, again, down to the census tract level, information about unbanked, about how many people have graduated from high school, all kinds of information. The problem with these is you can waste an incredible amount of time on them. You can just get hooked and start playing with them. And this TRF policy map, which, yeah, and they do have a 7-day free trial. And then
that one's excellent, especially for healthy foods financing, if you're into that.
Your own CDFI certification and previous grant applications have a lot of useful data in them. Okay. So we already talked about economic stress points. The strategy question is this. The way they did it last year, you could only include 50 census tracts. So depending on the geographic area, there are some CDFIs that serve a lot more than 50 census tracts. And there was conflicting information from the fund about what they would require in terms of deploying the award to those census tracts. So, and then some of the census tracts gave you higher points and some gave you lower points based on the level of economic distress. So do you choose the tracts that give you the most points and commit yourself to deploy your award there? Or do you choose an area that really represents more of the area you serve, possibly lower your score?
I would just add a quick point that really the distress points are 4 points out of 100. So I would really suggest don't get, I was just saying, Deirdre, that this is 4 points out of 100. So it's really not going to make or break getting an award or not. Obviously you want to get all the points you can. But you only want to claim those census tracts that you're going to be able to deploy to. So that, bottom line, if you're not going to be able to deploy to those, just don't claim them. And don't get hung up on 4 points. It's not required. And you're not looked at negatively. You just didn't claim any distress points. One other really quick point is that, so we actually, for things like this that we can improve on, we actually, in the Federal Register a couple weeks ago, just put a solicitation for public comment, and it's actually due this Friday, so it's perfect timing. If any of you have been writing grant applications, there's any little points like this that we can improve on, we're soliciting public comment. So this is a perfect opportunity, and there's 4 main areas that we're soliciting comment on. We listed it. We put a link on our website, and it's also in the Federal Register, or FR. It's due this Friday, though.
Okay.
Thanks, Deirdre. Sorry.
There's a table where they ask about the customer profile. What percentage of your borrowers break down into different ethnic groups, single head of household, and many of us don't keep that information. Some of the information for credit unions, for example, you're even legally prohibited from keeping. Estimates are okay, is what we've been told. You need to indicate in the narrative how you derive those estimates. And one tip is there's an other column, and you can use the other column to indicate groups that aren't covered in the form. I worked with one credit union that served Hmong, Laotian immigrants in one of their branches. That was like 30% of their members were from Laos, so they could indicate that in that other column, or people with disabilities, you know, anything that's unique that doesn't fit into the other demographic categories. So that this is about the financial products, services, and financial activity slides. And
this is particularly important.
yeah, so this was a big problem for people last year because, for one thing, you couldn't import the data from Excel into the PDF. Has that changed? Is that
So
changed?
we actually last week just met with grants.gov. So they developed the PDF for us. And so we're working on ways to see if we can have an import-export function for FY13. So that particular issue will be addressed. And that's a perfect thing to put into the public comment, is just any gripes or improvements that you have.
Okay, and then the other problem was that for financial products, types of loans, you could only enter 7. Some of us have more types of loans than that. And then for the financial activities chart, the types of activities automatically populated from these other charts. So is that, you don't know if that's changing yet?
So yeah, all that, and actually that was corrected. We actually issued a revised application halfway through the funding round in the last round. So it was actually corrected in FY12's funding round. So it will most certainly be corrected in 13.
Okay. And then just to point out that these forms require 3 years of historic activity, the current year, and 5 years of projections. And, you know, 5 years of projections, who knows what they're worth? No.
We didn't want 5 years either. We actually had to because that was one of the statutes that Congress had for us.
Yeah.
Because we found, and we used to have 3 years because that's where we found there was more value, but we actually had a finding from our auditor that dinged us and said, hey, you guys are only doing 3 years of projections, you need to do 5. So that's where that came from.
No one is going to hold you to those 5 years of projections. Next one, Brian. We can skip through this.
Skip it? Keep going?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm assuming it'll be better. Okay. Apply from strength, not need. And Brian was referring to this also. The community has needs. The CDFI has strength. As I said, we've done this much, and with your money, we can do this much more to address the community's needs. Distinguish demand from need. Need is the problem that's out there. Demand is people actually wanting to use the products. How do you show what's in your pipeline? Are you turning borrowers away? Demonstrate that people actually want what you have to offer. And that's the key distinction for them. Reaching the hardest to reach. We already talked about acknowledge past problems. To use a credit union example, a few years ago, there was a major crisis in the credit union world. The corporate credit unions in which regular credit unions invest all basically went bankrupt. And it cost credit unions an enormous amount of money. The CDFI Fund knows about that. How did you address it? How did you deal with it? So, you know, if the housing market in your community collapsed with the mortgage crisis, write about that and what you did to address it.
How about the problems of the credit union?
Yeah.
Would you put that in there?
Yeah. I would put it in there if you have done something constructive to deal with it. You know, you don't want to just say, you know, our CFO absconded with $1 million and we're all crying, you know.
But like, isn't it not true that the regulator has to by law share the camel codes with the fund?
Right. That's not part of the scoring though.
No, but I mean, let's say you're camel 4.
But we do take a look at that, yeah.
So you're not breaking NCUA's rules by explaining, because they don't want you to disclose.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But here you can disclose.
Right.
So if you were a camel 4 and now you've been upgraded to a 3, that might not be.
I don't think you're allowed to give the numbers.
You are, because,
NCUA is allowed to give the numbers. I don't think the credit unions are.
We'll just check. We're going to verify it.
they're gonna look at it anyway.
Yeah,
Okay, we got a lousy code.
right,
Now it's not so lousy.
right. We moved up to the next
Okay,
category.
oh, there you
We're
go.
not allowed to use the numbers.
Okay.
Okay, so I think,
Next, or that's it?
yeah, next, yeah, just contact information. And CU Breakthrough is a credit union consulting arm of the National Federation. So, questions for either me or Brian?
It's a long application, but like we're saying, it can help with strategic planning process, and it's the comprehensive business plan. Our FY13 application, so we're going to make the FY12 announcements sometime mid this summer. Then this fall we'll release our FY13 application. So we try to keep it open as long as we possibly can. Usually it's about 60 days at minimum that we have it open for. So one of the big things is to sign up for email alerts through our website if you haven't already. We try to broadcast it through the various channels and through the listservs as well to say, okay, it's been published. But you can also sign up on grants.gov, so you'll know as soon as that we release our NOFA, you can go and download the application on grants.gov. You can also sign up for email alerts through our website, and just any programs you're interested in, you'll get an email the minute that we announce it on our website. So you'll know, because you don't want to find out about it 30 days into the 60-day cycle, something like that. And you know, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be a resource to any of you. I'm from New York, so I'm happy to support the New York City Files.
Question for you. If you had problems in the past with compliance, in any of these forms, is it adjustable or not really?
Well, I think that's one of the big tips we had is check with the compliance team, because we actually, for eligibility, there's compliance eligibility. So if you have outstanding reports, right there, you're going to be ineligible.
Right.
So we wouldn't want to spend, I think the estimated burden hours from BPD, or from OMB, I'm sorry, Office of Management and Budget with the White House,
Right.
is around 200 hours in application is the estimated burden hour, up to 200 hours. So we would hate for anyone to spend hours and hours and be found ineligible. So that's why a huge tip is to check with our compliance team, make sure you've submitted all of your previous reports. And so that's right on the front end. So
Okay.
that's something we do. Your application won't even be reviewed if you haven't submitted all of your reports.
But also, even if you have submitted your reports, if in the past you failed to meet a performance measure, explain why. And
So that's my question is, say you put in the FATA application already, but then later on CIB comes to you saying, oh, you're missing this, and you need this. How does that work now? Do you guys both communicate about that?
Well, see, those are the kind of things that are in that NOFA. So all those little details that you can look at as soon as the notice of funding availability comes up, it'll tell you that exact question. You're not going to be found ineligible. Every NOFA changes, so you just want to make sure you read the 13.1. So for in 12, it's as of the date of the application, outstanding reports.
Okay.
So as of when the due date is. So you're not, if you miss a report later, you're not going to be found ineligible. What they actually do though is our compliance team, once we have a ranking list, they actually have compliance scoring deductions. So they can drop points off for late report scoring, and I think it's for the last 3 rounds. And so your most recent reporting is really important for eligibility and for higher scoring as well. So like we're saying, I mean, you want to keep all the points on the table as possible. I think all these tips are just little things to score as highly as possible. I think just little things like knowing need versus demand, just those finer things can really improve the score. And I'm happy to talk about any strategies as well. So thanks, guys. And was there one more question?
I was just going to ask that if you applied and were not funded, is there sort of a review process afterwards that you can call someone and to sort of go through your application and what?
Yeah, I can't comment on for this current round, but in the past we've always done debriefing documents, and so we post those to your My CDFI Fund account, so you can at least see how you scored in each of the particular sections.
those have been basically worthless for a
I was-
couple of years. No offense, but.
I'll bring that
you
message
know,
back.
Well,
I'm hearing you on that.
how is that?
I'm hearing you.
And why, Deirdre? Just
Because
not
they
enough
just
information?
say, they just say, response in this section was average.
Oh,
Response
okay.
in this
Not why.
section was average, things
Our
like that.
question-
I'll bring that message back. Thank you.
Before, like 2 years ago, there were pretty good
Substantive,
explanations,
yeah.
and then
Right.
not helpful anymore.
How's the mapping function as compared to years past?
So that's actually an update for the CDFI Fund. Is we're actually going to be updating our SIMS mapping system. So this fall we're going to be rehauling some of those mappings and updating using 2010 ACS American Community Survey data. So that's a real exciting thing we have coming up in the next year.
Would that be live for the new application, or is it going to be after?
So all the details with what would need to happen for you guys. Luckily, the mapping system has nothing to do with funding right now. It's really just for the certification application.
It's useful
So
for-
there's no mapping
Oh,
requirement
there's
for
no
our
mapping
funding.
for the funding.
No, sir. No.
Yeah, I mean, you can pull in that data to demonstrate.
Okay, all right.
But we're revamping that system.
Okay.
also.
You were,
On the distress points, as a CDFI that does urban and rural lending, I keep bringing this issue up wherever I can, but I think it's really important for federal agencies to understand that census tract data in rural counties can be very misleading. If you go to the lowest census tract area, you're out in the middle of raw land usually, and that's not where you want to do development. You want to do development in the towns, the small cities, and they are the areas that have the higher median income. So, in an urban area, if you're looking at, the low income areas, that makes sense to target that for redevelopment. But in rural
I
areas,
think
it's
that's
not.
a perfect thing to bring up for our public comments. But I think also that's the challenge that we have at the CDFI Fund is how many diverse types of CDFIs there are, and just making sure we can have an application that accepts and gets the best quality from all institution types and all geographies. And that's something we're trying to constantly improve on. So yeah, I mean that's a really good point.
I may have been writing instead of listening at that point, but after the 3 reviewers review it and you have to get at least 150 points to go on, then what happens?
So what happens is that's called phase 1. So if anyone is interested in being a reviewer, that would be where you would review and score up to 300 points is in the phase 1 process. So after phase 1, we have what we call phase 2. So it's just some internal due diligence that we have. And so we look at all 3 scores combined and we reconcile any differences that existed between the 3 reviewers and we come up with our recommendation for an award size. So that's one of the next big steps. And then also the obligation of our funding from our financial management office, so we know how much we have that we can put out the door. And so during that process we're finding out, so we're authorized to do up to $2 million for FA annually and $100,000 for TA. In the past we've always fully funded TA, but we haven't fully funded FA because the demand for so many quality groups outseeds how much funding we have from Congress, like the $120 million painting that we're talking about. So what we do is we say, well, there's so many good groups, so many high-scoring groups, quality groups that are going to do great things. We drop from $2 million. In some years, we made a ton of awards. We made 125 awards, and we capped it at $750,000. But then there was a backlash from people, and so there would be more effectiveness with larger size awards and more leveraging. So then, we've kind of played around in the past with that cap, and we've gone from between 1.5 million to 750,000. Can't say what we're going to do. It basically just depends on the scores, and we do have a geography requirement as well. So we want to make sure that we're geographically dispersed. But the good thing about those phase 1 reviewers is they're bipartisan and they're from all over the country. So really, the primary thing is those scores. And there's very, very little tweaking, because I've worked with the award list in terms of geographic disbursement funding because CDFIs are all around the country. So really that hasn't been a problem for us at all. It's more of just going as far down the list as we can to the most qualified groups that we can fund.
So would you say that if you're asking for less funds, there's a better chance, or does it matter?
Yeah, I mean, I think point Deirdre, I don't know if you want to comment on that. I think the point that you made before is really a valid point. Is you're going to want to talk about how you're going to leverage the funds. So if depending on what your asset size are, we have two categories of FA. So I didn't mention that before. We have a core group and a SECA group. So for smaller and emerging, if you can only request up to $600,000 for FA, and once you request more than $600,000 in FA, you've self-selected yourself to be a core applicant. But for loan funds under $5 million, I would strongly recommend applying for a SECA category because you're competing against other applicants of like type and asset size. So that's my bottom line recommendation is always if you're a SECA, apply for SECA.
So out of the, say, the 33 that applied, how many is SECA and how many, like what's the percentage? Is 400 percentage?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't do that for you, but we actually have an award highlight document. So all this information we gathered was publicly available information.
Yeah.
So just so you know, and so there's award highlights, and we break out SECA and core on those. So you could look at 2000, and each year has a separate document. So you just have to kind of do that yourself.
But basically, if you're asking for more money, you want to show more leverage, more impact.
In the past 3 rounds, just really quickly, Brian, the past 3 rounds matching funds has been waived. So really there isn't any need to ask for less than $2 million because you don't know what our funding cap is going to be. So I would say never sell yourself short. Don't ask for.
Now you're not waiving, you're asking.
But now matching funds is back in place. So obviously that's going to factor in what if you're asking for FA. For TA, matching funds is not applicable. There's no matching for TA.
Right.
So if you have 100,000, I would say ask for 100,000. You know, but for FA, you know, whatever your matches might be 1.4 million. You know, and that's as much as you can ask for, or whatever the case is. So you know, ask up to how much match you have. I would suggest just fully max it out.
Any changes with NACA? We're working with NACA groups too.
So there's no changes to NACA groups.
That's a Native American.
So our Native American program is going to be the same for. The big change was this year for our NACA groups for FY12 that we're working on right now, because they had their own application and we switched them to a more similar format as the CDFI, FA, and TA. So that was a big change for the NACA groups for 12, which has already happened. There's not going to be any changes really. It'll be the same for FA, TA, and NACA for 13.
Okay, and was it very competitive or not as?
So for NACA, it was less competitive this year.
Okay.
In FY12, it was less competitive. We had fewer. In 11, we had a real big uptick of FA NACAs.
Right.
And this year, that dropped back down. I think we only had 22 groups apply for FA, which is really small. And there's like 50 or 60 NACA certified CDFIs.
Right.
Oh, and just one quick question. So for organizations that are national, my organization is national, but it has definitely geographic intensity, you know, kind of hubs. And New York is one of the places we do a lot of lending. Are there any disadvantages or advantages in terms of being a large organization but with different areas in which we do lending as well as different products? A little bit harder to kind of make our application.
I think the disadvantage is really trying to fit it into
fit everything
the
in.
text
That's right.
limit.
That's what we're doing.
Talking
Yeah.
about different target markets and different needs, and
Because it's not at a project level.
I know.
So we just want to know at an institution level what you're doing.
Yeah.
And so the reviewer can ding you if you really just focused on New York City. And they say, well, what about the other areas? So I would say you just want to make sure, and that's the challenge, is just fitting it all in.
Okay.
That's
That's all.
yeah.
I looked outside. We're the only ones here.
It must have been a good session. Thank you guys.
We want you to-
Well, thank you both.
All right, thanks.